So if you could start off by telling me your name.
My name is Roscoe Bowler Stephenson, Jr.
And when were you born?
I was born February the 22nd, 1922.
And where?
Where? At Covington, Virginia.
Tell me a little bit about your parents and your siblings.
Well, my father was a lawyer, and my mother was a school teacher.
And what were their names?
Well, my father's name same as mine. I'm Junior, so he was Roscoe Bowler Stephenson. And my mother was Elizabeth Jackson Stephenson. She was originally from Nottoway County, Blackstone, that area.
So your father had roots in Covington?
Well, no, not really. He was from Highland County. That's a small county, 2 counties north of Alleghany, where Covington is.
How did they end up in Covington?
Well, my mother went there to teach school, and my father went there to start practicing law. He had a great uncle who was a lawyer there in Covington, and he sort of broke in under him, but he never was. They never were really in an association together. But but I think he probably gave my father some good guidance as he began the practice of law.
And where did your father go to law school?
Well, he went to Washington and Lee University.
And so did you
I.
have any siblings?
I had 2 sisters. One of my sisters passed away in, I think it was in 1989. Let me see. No, 1979. I believe.
Numbers. I'm just not a numbers
And then
person.
I have a sister that, younger sister who lives now down in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. She and her husband are living in a retirement place.
So tell me a little bit about growing up in Covington.
Well, it's a small town, of course, and it's primarily a mill town, so it had the usual problems you have with paper mills, but a lot of fine people there, and I had a very happy childhood. I have no complaints about it at all.
Well, now, since your mother was a teacher, did you go to the same school?
Well, she didn't teach any after she got married and started raising a family. She didn't, but she had taught for a number of years before that. She and my father weren't real young when they got married. I think she was 32 and he was 34. But he'd been ill for a while, but he got over it, I'm happy to say. And so they got married in June of 1919, and not too long after that, October of 1920, my older sister was born. And then I came along. I wasn't but 16 months younger than my older sister. So if she were living, she'd be 86 still until October the 24th. And I'm 85, so you see how for a lot of the time we're just a year apart, you might say.
So the two of you grew up very closely.
Well, we were pretty close. She was right bossy. But anyway, yeah, we got along fine.
Did you compete with each other growing up?
I didn't feel like we did.
Did you always want to be a lawyer?
I don't think so. I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I was the right age for the war, you know, and I volunteered and I went into the Army, but they had a physical, didn't have anything better to do, and had everybody take a physical examination one time, and this doctor thought I had a heart murmur, and I guess I had a heart murmur, but it hasn't seemed to affect me too much. That was back in 1943. But I begged them to keep me in the Army, but they put me out. I couldn't get back again. my father had a first cousin that was in the United States Senate and on the Armed Services Committee, and he couldn't get them to re-examine me. Maybe they thought I was crazy because I wanted to get back in, but you know, you felt pretty bad about it when the war was on. That was kind of a low point in my life, I think.
Did you have a lot of friends who went into the Army?
Oh yeah, college friends and town friends, hometown friends.
Well, let me back up just a little bit to high school. This was still at the
Covington
in the middle,
High School.
Right?
Covington High School.
This was in the middle of the Depression.
It was.
And what was the mill town like during that period?
Well, probably financially as bad as it was, we were probably in better shape in most places. I think because of the paper mill, and they had some other industry there too. It was an industrial town at the time. They've lost a lot of that industry, although the paper mill is still there. But more recently, it doesn't seem to have the people or the jobs that we used to have. But I went to high school. Speaking of the Depression, when I got up to the 7th through the 7th grade, you're supposed to have 8 grades before you went to high school. Well, because of the Depression, they took the 8th grade out. So I was in the first class that didn't have an 8th grade. So I guess I got shortchanged, and that's affected me ever since. But so I finished high school when I was 16. Not because I was so smart, but just because they pulled the 8th grade out. And then my parents thought I was too young to go off to college right then, and I went to a military prep school for 1 year.
Which one?
Greenbrier Military School in Lewisburg, West Virginia. It was an old school founded in 1812, but when the military schools got to be very unpopular, I think because of the Vietnam War primarily, and it closed along with a number of others in fairly close proximity to our home.
So prior to going to the military school, were you involved in things such as the Boy Scouts or the 4-H club?
I was in Boy Scouts.
How far did you go?
Well, I was an Eagle Scout. They let me have it.
And so when you were in school, in high school, did you take any foreign languages? Did you have an interest in any area in particular? I took
some French, but I didn't have much interest in it, and I didn't do very well with it. But I did take some French, and I took 2 years in high school. I took a year at the prep school, and I think I had a couple of years at college, but I don't know much French at all.
Have you ever visited France?
Yes, a number of times. And,
so growing up, did you travel about with your parents?
Well, we didn't do too much traveling. I think we used to go up to Atlantic City sometimes in the summer. And then we'd go down to my mother's hometown, usually on Thanksgiving. That was an eventful trip because my father, back then you had to go through all the cities and towns. You know, the highways weren't like they are today. And Lynchburg, where my wife's from, is noted for some of its hills, you know. And my father wasn't too good at, when he had to stop with a stoplight on one of those steep streets. It was a right harrowing moment when he had to try to get it going again. But particularly with 3 children in the back seat. But you can imagine.
Was this an old Ford?
It was a Chevrolet. Didn't, oh, he didn't, no, it wasn't a real old Ford. This was a 1928 Chevrolet. I remember that.
Oh. So you finished high school, you went to the prep school, the military prep school, and then you went to college. Where did you attend college?
Well, I went to Washington Lee, just like my father.
And at what
I entered
point?
there in 1939, fall. Beg your pardon?
At what point did you decide you wanted to follow your father and go into law?
Well, I mentioned that I was out of the Army, and I didn't know what I would do. The war was on. And a friend of ours who had been the town manager ran into my father on the street just about the time, a day or two after I'd come home, and wanted to know what I was doing. And my dad told him, said, well, he just got out of the Army. He said, wonder if he'd like to have a job down. He was the head of a construction job down at Hampton, Virginia, where they were building a big power plant because of all the war activities down there. So I jumped at that. I never had been to Hampton, I don't think. Got on a train. I think the train dead ends about at Hampton. Somebody met me over there in hip boots, and I realized why when I got to the construction site, because it was just a big hole in the ground and a lot of mud. And they said my job would be to make sure that all these pilings they were going to put in there were put into their right specifications. And so I did my best with that, but I couldn't swear all of them got into the right specifications. And, well, I worked at that job 10 months, and then I thought maybe I was going to try to go to sea, get into the merchant marine. So I got this job on the steamer that ran from Norfolk to Baltimore up to Chesapeake Bay, thinking that would be a big step towards going ocean, out in the ocean. I worked at that for 7 months, and it was then, at that time, I think that I thought maybe I better start thinking about going to law school if I'm ever going to do it. So I went to law school at the same school, but the war was still on. And believe it or not, there were only 2 law students. A chap named Wise Kelly, H. Wise Kelly, he's now deceased. And he and I were the 2 students, and actually the first year of law school, we were more like being tutored than we sat around the table with the professors, and you had to be pretty well prepared, because they would certainly catch you if you didn't. So that first year, I think I had a right good base in law school, but I don't. Then when a lot of the students came back the next fall, the war was over, and things were a little more relaxed. But I finished law. That's how. That was a long answer, but that's how I kind of decided to go to law school, and I wasn't sure whether I'd ever make it or not.
What did your parents say when you entered the Merchant Marines?
Well, I never really. I guess you could say I was in it. It was under the Coast Guard, the Merchant Marines, but I don't think I know what they said. I guess if they had known I was trying to get on one of the ships going out to the Pacific with the kamikazes, they probably would have thought I'd crazy, but other than that, I don't know what to do.
So did they influence you at all in your decision to get into law?
No, I don't think so.
So once you got to law school, did you have any particular interests, any focuses that you saw at that time?
How's that?
when you first got into law school, and
Mhm.
especially during your first year, did you find any particular focus of law that really struck your interest?
Well, I was interested in all those courses, original courses, and but as to what really caught my eye, I can't tell you.
Did you have any professors that you particularly enjoyed?
Oh yeah, one in particular, Mr. Clayton Williams. Clayton Williams. His nickname was Skinny. He was a tall, thin man, and he was highly regarded as a property teacher, particularly real property. But he taught personal property as well, at least at that time. And he, because of the war, he also would go over and teach at the University of Virginia Law School at that time. He later was the dean of the law school, so he was a good teacher and pretty tough too.
What was it that you enjoyed about his classes?
Well, he was just an interesting lecturer, and he could call on you and he'd make you pretty nervous.
Did he influence how you looked at law?
I'm sure he did, but I can't really pinpoint how and when, but certainly he gave us a good schooling in property law, I thought. And there were other good ones. But the faculty was very small. I don't think, even when the students really had come back, I don't think they had but 5 or 6 professors. Now, Lord knows how many they have over there, but a lot.
Were there any others who really impacted the way that you thought about law or wrote briefs or anything?
Well, I'm sure they did, but I can't elaborate on it.
So what happened after law school?
Well, I went home. I didn't think I was going to practice in Covington. I thought I had some other places, and it's all in the back of my mind. But my mother became ill, and in that year, 1947, in the latter part of that year, she passed away. So my dad was kind of there by himself, and I didn't have me around beat nothing. And so I started out practicing with him. And we had a little firm there, I guess you could call it, from 1947 until 1952. First of 52, I went to the Commonwealth Attorney's office.
And what kind of law were you mostly focusing on during that time?
Just most anything that came in the office, but it wasn't anything very big, of course.
Now, before I ask you about the shift to the prosecutor's office, what was going on in your personal life?
Oh, well, I was getting to be what considered a bachelor, I guess, because I was 28 years old, and then my father remarried, and my stepmother had been in Lynchburg for a while, teaching school, before my father married her. And she, oddly enough, had gotten to know my future wife's mother, and I think
Well, and she knew me too.
and she knew Jane. She knew Jane too, although she didn't. She just missed teaching Jane, I think, by a year. Anyway, when Jane finished college, she was trying to find a place to teach school, and one of her neighbors and friends in Lynchburg said, "Why don't you try Covington? They quite often need teachers." So she did that, and she got a job teaching sophomore English And she went to church one Sunday, and my stepmother spotted her, and greeted her, and said, "Now I'm going to call you and have you come to dinner someplace soon." She thought, well, you know, that's nice, but I doubt if I'll hear anything. But sure enough, she called her a few days later, and this is what my wife Jane says. She said, "And I have a young son,
She said, my young
stepson
has heard about you and is just dying to meet you."
We met on September the 15th, which will soon be 57 years ago, 15th of this month. And by the last day of March the following year, we were married. So things moved along.
Well, now, you know, that's quite unusual for a man to remember the day that he would meet his future wife.
Well, I don't know. People say I have a sort of a faculty for remembering dates and ages and stuff. I said I can remember things like that don't amount to anything, and things I should be remembering I can't remember. So that's the way it goes.
So the moment that you met your future wife, that was it?
It seemed to be. I think it was kind of it for both of us.
And you left a lot of broken hearts behind.
Oh, no.
So your courtship was pretty brief, and once you got married, where did you all settle?
We stayed at Covington, and we had a little apartment, but we soon discovered that we were going to have an addition to the family, and we had to get a larger apartment. And then along about, it was in 1959, I think it was 59, we bought a house, and we lived in it for 37 years, raised our children there, really. And
so how many children did the two of you have?
we had 3. We lost a daughter when she was 30. She was the oldest of the 3. Very fine girl, young lady. Went to Agnes Scott College, was made Phi Beta Kappa there. She had one child who must have taken after, because he's real smart, and I don't know where he got all that gray matter, because it must have been from her side of the family. Anyway.
Your daddy was no gun.
And we have 2 sons. The older was just exactly 2 years younger than her daughter. Well, both January babies. He's now 53, and he's a lawyer. And
What is his name?
he's got the same name, only he's the 3rd.
Okay.
I mean, why you keep going with a funny name like that, I don't know.
It's too funny to do.
And so your other son, what is his name?
Well, he didn't take too much to book learning. He's a real personable, likable chap, but he wasn't really too much of a student. Got plenty of sense, but he just didn't apply himself. So although he went to a couple of colleges, he doesn't have a degree, and but he's in sales, and he's a pretty good salesman, I think.
And what is his name?
His name is Thomas Edmonds. That's Stephenson. Thomas Edmonds was my wife's father's name, Thomas Edmonds.
And when was he born?
He was born in 1958, December the 15th, which happened to be my mother's birthday too. And I was hoping. I was born on George Washington's birthday, you know, and I was hoping that our son Roscoe, we call him Steve, the older of the 2 boys, I was hoping he'd be born on General Lee's birthday, but he was born one day prior to that. No, that messed that up. But anyway, I've forgiven her.
Well, now, I understand that you're a member of the Presbyterian Church. Has your family always been Presbyterians?
Yes, they both. They were, for some reason, they both were Presbyterians, and I am sort of a non-resident member of the First Presbyterian Church. I don't attend it. Since I moved to Hot Springs, I've been attending the Episcopal Church because Jane's a member of that church now. And I'm a friend of the church, I guess you'd say. I figured I was too old to finally leave a church in which I had been baptized. I was older than the present building, by a year, I think. And I just didn't think it was the right thing to do, although I don't attend it, but I try to support it some, my limited way.
Well, let's get to the your career. Back to your career. Why did you decide to leave your family practice and go into the prosecuting office?
Well, I sort of got that job by default. I'll tell you, you don't do too many smart things in a lifetime, I reckon, but I was always glad that I made this decision. Our Commonwealth attorney at that time, a man named T. Moore Butler, and he was, I thought, a very good Commonwealth attorney. And I was doing some criminal defense work along with whatever business I could find. And one day in the summertime, he came. He used to park his car right near where my father and I had our office, and it had a porch on it. And I was out on the porch, and he stopped, and we were having a nice little chat there. And he finally said to me, "Do you mind if I ask you something?" And I said, "No, what is it?" He said, "Are you planning on running for Commonwealth attorney?" And I said, "No, I like the one we have." That was my answer. And I think he felt relieved, although he'd have beaten the stuffings out of me, I'm sure. but sadly enough, on Christmas Day, he was then 45, I think, he dropped dead. He'd been playing with his children, had young children, and he died on Christmas Day. Well, back then, he'd just been reelected for about a fourth term coming up. So there was a vacancy, and the circuit judge appointed me. And back then, you were appointed for the full term. See that? But I've often thought, I am so glad that I didn't try to run against him. And you might have felt like that helped bring on this trouble or something. But I think that was a streak of luck for me. Bad luck for him, of course, and I'm sorry for it. Was terribly sorry for it. Of course, we were good friends. We'd gotten to be friends. I didn't know him until I started practicing law there. Because he was quite a bit older than I.
So you knew most of, if not all, the attorneys and the judges and so forth, not only in your city but in the region?
Well, I knew a lot of the attorneys. We didn't have very many lawyers then, and I knew them. They were all older men, my father's age, and maybe some younger, but I knew them slightly, and I got to know them. I was kind of an upstart.
And where did most of them go to law school?
The other lawyers in town, I'd say either University of Virginia or Washington Lee, for the most part.
So was there ever a rivalry between the graduates of those two schools?
I don't think if there's rivalry, it wasn't because of the schools they attended, I don't think. But back then, the lawyers were very friendly and seemed to get along well together.
What prompted the judge to appoint you to the office?
Well, maybe he didn't have too many options. I think that's probably the only answer I can give you. But
you never talked with him about it?
I don't think I did. I guess he knew that I would be happy to receive the appointment, but I don't think I didn't talk to him about it. And I don't know, I guess some others maybe did.
Was your father disappointed when you left the practice?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so.
So what were some of the experiences that you had as a prosecutor that stand out in your mind?
I'd no sooner got in the office and we had a sensational murder case. It didn't look like it was a murder case. It looked like an accidental fire death. But upon further investigation, they found out that this old man had been knocked in the head, and then they set fire to the building he was sleeping in to make it look like an accident. And right along about the same time as that, the paper went on a big strike, and one of the officials over there said, "Well, have you ordered the state police in yet?" And I said, "No, and I'm not going to." Well, I wasn't but 20. I was 29. I reckon he thought this smart aleck, but I said, as long as the sheriff can handle it peaceably, I think it'd be a mistake to bring the state police in. We never did bring them in. And for the most part, it was pretty peaceful, but until as the strike went on, then there's a movement by some to go back to work, and others didn't want to do it. So there were some scuffles over that, of course. But I hope I don't bring on strikes, but when I was circuit judge, that was another big strike they had. That's the last big strike they've had over there. And I sort of was involved in two big strikes, but I survived them.
So was Covington as a region or town, were they hostile to these strikes, or did you see an element of support?
I don't think the people that weren't involved in either the company or the union, other people were not hostile to either one, I don't think. No. I think a lot of people regretted, because in my experience, no one ever wins on a strike. Maybe they do have winners and losers, but it doesn't seem like it to me. But excuse me.
So, in your role as prosecutor, and then when you were appointed to the bench, what kinds of people did that bring you in contact with in the rest of Virginia?
Well, when I became a circuit court judge,
yes.
Well, you came in contact with all types and every kind of a case, you might say.
Did you find yourself coming to Richmond occasionally?
Not as a circuit judge. I had appeared before this court a number of times when I was practicing lawyer, and with some fair amount of success.
Tell me about that. When you were a lawyer coming before the state Supreme Court, what were some of the cases?
The cases, well, one case in particular had to do with who owned the school buildings between Alleghany County and Covington, because Covington in 1950, I guess, 51 or 2, became a city of the second class, which meant county, it shared certain offices with the county, but it was, of course, also independent from the tax base and all that sort of thing. Well, so, but they had, see, it had been all county, because cities and counties in Virginia are totally separate, whereas in all other states, I think that's not the case. A city is more like a town in Virginia. That's the reason annexation, I think, is such a drastic thing. But anyway, they had this big squabble over ownership, and the circuit judge ruled that those buildings that were in Covington went to the city and left the county kind of high and dry on school. Well, we took that to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court very wisely reversed that decision. And then they had, since they both had an interest in the school, they had to determine what the monetary settlement should be. And I believe that went to the Supreme Court also. And I think there again, the county gained by doing it. But I just remember that in particular.
So did the county usually bring some of its legal business to your law firm?
Well, I was handling that because back then a Commonwealth attorney was also had to represent the Board of Supervisors. I wasn't paid a whole lot of money for my work. We had, matter of fact, when I went into the office, I think the salary was something like $4,800, and I was there in the office 12 years, and I think when I left it was probably $6,000. Of course, dollars were a little larger then, but that was still pretty poor pay, wasn't it?
Definitely.
You're not going to get rich doing that job then, anyway.
So tell me, once you were appointed to the bench, what were some of the interesting or tough cases that you had to take a look at?
Well, I don't know that I think the cases that really you hated to fool with most, at least I did, were those involving child custody, because that's very emotional, and people who had the children were sort of more interested quite often in getting back at each other than in doing what might be best for the child, I think. So they were mean battles sometimes. Divorce cases, we had to handle a lot of divorce cases then, and that was not too pleasant. Criminal cases we had. I had actually, I believe, 5 courthouses that I went to in the circuit. The circuit was, we had 2 other circuit court judges, but they had their areas primarily, and I had mine. And I had Warm Springs for Bath County, Covington for Alleghany County, Fincastle for Botetourt County, Newcastle for Craig County, and Clifton Forge then was an independent city and had a circuit court of its own. And I had, so that, how many is that, 5?
Mm-hmm.
my work was mainly at Fincastle in Covington then. Now, Predecessor County is growing right much now, I can tell that, so I don't know how they, but as soon after I left the circuit court, very soon afterwards, they put a fourth judge in the circuit. I don't know whether they thought I was doing all that work or not, but I was right busy.
So
I enjoyed it though. I like being a circuit court judge. I was really happy with it.
why did you like it?
I liked it because one thing, I practiced law for 26 years, and I think I was just kind of burning out at it. And you can't win them all, and when you lose, people don't accept losses too well like that. And that sort of thing, you have to, and then criminal cases, you didn't know whether you were going to ever collect your fee or not. A lot of times you didn't, and that sort of thing. Well, I found being a judge more to my liking. I just really enjoyed that work, didn't I?
Mm-hmm.
Did you find that with all the traveling that kept you from
That didn't bother
home?
me. I kind of like that too. Driving around to I was a circuit rider, I guess.
And so you did that for how long?
Almost 8 years.
And what happened after that?
Well, that's when I went on the Supreme Court.
So tell us a little bit about how that happened.
Well, I guess some people maybe thought that I was doing a pretty good job as a circuit judge, and some of them were in the General Assembly, and when an opening came up, the first time was in 1980 or 79, I guess it was, and I had a fair amount of support and endorsements from the various bar associations and people probably who didn't know me endorsed me, but the man who got it was pretty certain that he'd probably win out over me on that, because he had very strong support from the Speaker of the House and so forth. They were good friends. And that was Judge Carrington Thompson from down Pennsylvania County. So he won out on that. But the exposure I had at that time didn't hurt. The next year there was another opening. When Chief Justice Ianson, he retired, leaving a vacancy there, and that time I'm pleased to say that I prevailed. I don't know. There were some other candidates, but I seemed to have right strong support. I was just very fortunate to have good bar endorsements, and also to have members of the General Assembly that practiced before me regularly. Yeah. So, but it's luck, and for somebody like me, from a small country town who had never had a judge like that, it was unbelievable that I would win out. But I don't know, maybe the hand of Providence was in, I don't know. But I'm mighty glad that I did.
Who were some of your strongest supporters in the General Assembly?
Well, Dudley Emick from over in Fincastle area was in the state Senate and seemed to be a right well-regarded leader in the Senate. He was in, and a fellow named Irwin Shad Solomon was in the House from Bath County, and another man, William Wilson, was from Alleghany and Covington, Alleghany County. So those three in particular, I guess you could say.
Had you known them for years?
Well, I'd known them, yes, a good while.
And they were also attorneys?
They all practiced before me, yeah. They were
So is that how you got to know them as the circuit court judge, or did you know them in other circles?
Well, I knew them when I was practicing law, because we all practiced in the same general area, and then I got to know them as a circuit judge too.
So now, what changes did you see from the time that you were a prosecutor and then as a circuit court judge to 1981 when you were appointed to the court? And what I mean by changes is just the change in how the practice of law went on in Virginia, the types of people perhaps that you would encounter in the courts.
Well, I feel like I had a lot of friends when I was practicing law, because as I say, the lawyers, for the most part, then seemed to get along, and we were pretty friendly with one another. Of course, you at the moment when you had a trial or just getting over one, you might get a little feeling, but it wouldn't last. And then as a circuit judge, I don't know whether all judges, I think a lot of judges don't feel this way, but I felt like the lawyers were maybe the best friends I had. I liked the lawyers, and I enjoyed them, and I didn't mind seeing them get hot under the collar or go after each other, kind of. That's part of the business. I didn't expect them to get into a fight, and I didn't have that happen but once.
A fight?
Yeah, but I'm not going into names on that one.
What precipitated a fight? Are you talking about a fist fight?
Well, I don't think any blows were struck. Maybe some were attempted, but more of a shoving and wrestling match.
Inside the courtroom?
It was in the courtroom.
And what precipitated this?
Well, it was one of those custody battles, I think, as I remember. It involved divorce and custody. Some tempers flared. I don't know why the lawyers took it to heart, so they did.
Did you ever talk with them about that afterwards?
Oh, yeah. I first was going to hold them in contempt. I said it would, and then I thought better of it, and I didn't do it. But I did circulate a letter around the circuit, around the courts, that I expected lawyers to be more professional than that, and I don't know. I think the letter had a good effect all the way around. But the clerk of the court was very disappointed, because he's usually there in the courtroom, but he'd gone down to his office and he missed that scuffle.
So what made you decide not to hold them in contempt?
I felt like they both were pretty embarrassed about it, and I felt like it would just give more notoriety to the thing, and I don't know, I just felt like it was probably the best thing to do. Whether it was or not, I don't know, but it seemed to have its effect.
So now, when you were writing the decisions as a circuit court judge, what was the process that you engaged in?
Well, I did write a lot of little opinions when I was a circuit judge. The funny thing, though, my chief judge, a man I admired tremendously, he sort of advised me. He said he thought he'd been advised not to write very much. That would just be something the Supreme Court would pick at and use to reverse you. Well, I took a lot of his advice, but I didn't take that. I thought that the lawyers and the litigants should know why I decided something as I did. Of course, you couldn't have a written opinion in every case. You had so many cases, but in the cases that would warrant some explanation of the reason behind your decision, I wrote many little opinions for what they were worth.
Did the Supreme Court ever reverse any of your decisions?
I was reversed one time in a little case after I'd come on this court. In fact, it was, of course, the cases we were so busy, and you didn't have the Court of Appeals in. That appeals took a while for them to finally reach the argument stage, and some of my colleagues on the court took great delight in reversing that. But it was a divided court on it, I'll have to say that. They weren't all unanimous.
So all the decisions that were made, it wasn't until you actually were on the court that one of your decisions was reversed.
That's right. That was one thing that I guess my supporters pointed out, that I had not been reversed. But there again, Lady Luck, I guess, has a lot to do with somebody.
Let me go back for just a minute and ask, you know, the nation was changing while you were in prosecuting, while you were prosecutor and when you were circuit court judge. And one of the things that comes to my mind was school desegregation, the sit-ins, and all the other things that happened in the 50s and 60s. And I was wondering, what was your perspective of those events, and how did it impact the decisions that you made, if at all?
Well, we didn't have any problem like that in my locality to speak of. Things just seemed to work. The problems just seemed to kind of work themselves out, I guess. But one thing that comes to my mind. Back when I started practicing law, and when I was a circuit judge too, almost all the lawyers were male. Women hadn't really gotten into the law so much, but sometime along about, I guess in the 70s, maybe early 80s, the women came on with a lot of speed, and I mean, they just sprung up so many lawyers, and then they became judges and good lawyers and good judges, and that's been a big change in law as I see it from the time I started to now. We have the first woman judge is Judge Lacy, Justice Lacy, who's just retired. She's going to be a senior justice like I am, only she'll be a whole lot better than I am. But then she was followed by Justice Keenan, Barbara Keenan, and then when I retired, Justice Cynthia took my place, and they're all mighty good and smart, but they're just. And then we just yesterday we had as many women, it seemed like, arguing for petition for appeal as there were men. So they're just taking over the law, I think.
One of the previous justices said that when he was appointed to the court, he was there when women were first appointed as well. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that experience.
About when the first
woman was appointed as on the Supreme Court.
Well, that was Justice Lacy, and
how long had you been on the court at that point?
I think I'd been on about 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. and they were all, of course, male. And then Justice Lacy, but she was, she fit right in, and I think everybody was very impressed with her.
Now, did you all behave differently once a woman was in the chambers?
I would say, in some ways, yes.
Tell me how.
Well, if any jokes were told, they certainly were a little better than they had been. But I don't know. I don't think we did too much joke telling. But I don't know. Yes, maybe the men watched the manners a little more. I don't know. But of course, she didn't want to be treated any other than just she wanted to be treated like the rest of us would treat each other. I think that's what I think we did. That's the reason we got along.
Did you all have to change any of the accommodations?
I think probably bathrooms. I don't know about anything else.
And so did you find that people were, well, when you all went to the conference room and you began to talk about these cases, did you find that there were differences in how people talked with each other, spoke about the cases because of the presence of a woman?
No, I don't think so. I didn't feel that we changed our way of discussing cases, but because of the presence of Justice Lacy, continued the same way we always had.
Were there any occasions during which perhaps people got angry in discussing their positions?
I don't think, very rarely did I ever see anybody get angry. Could be arguments, but I don't think there was any anger in it. And by that time, by the time you get on the Supreme Court, I think you should know how to be quite civil to each other, and I think we were.
And so, what process was involved? Tell me about how cases were assigned and the kinds of cases that you typically got.
Well, opinions were assigned by kind of a draw. Actually, being a non-resident, being not living here in Richmond, I don't think I've been to but about one opinion assignment, draw, whatever you want to call it. But I'm sure it was all on the up and up. It was just the luck of the draw, or the unlucky of the draw, as to what case you might get the right opinion. It wasn't based on, well, you know, like maybe one justice has had more experience in a certain field of law than another. Some people might think that's the way it should be, but that's not. It's all about draw. If you'd never had a criminal case in your life and you were on the court, you would take that case and write the opinion.
Were there any particular cases that you found particularly difficult
To write?
to write and to make a decision about?
I thought most of them were difficult.
Why?
Well, writing opinions, even though in a way it's rather enjoyable work, it's pretty exacting too, and it's not easy. Even after all the years I've been trying to write them, I don't find it easy, but I'm pleased to have the opportunity.
Do any cases in particular stand out in your mind that you found particularly interesting that you were involved with directly?
I think we decided one of the first cases involving DNA evidence, and that was Spencer versus the Commonwealth. And he was convicted of 4 horrible murders, but I wrote the opinion in 3 of those cases, and I believe Justice Russell wrote the 4th one. But that was a bad series of murders right here. Well, it wasn't all in Richmond either, but around the state. But DNA really was locked him up. And even the death penalty opponents didn't seem to express much regret over that, what happened in that case. But all the death penalty cases were taken very seriously by our court, and a lot of the cases are affirmed. I know that, but if people think that this court doesn't take those things seriously and do what we see is the way they should be done, they just are not well informed, in my judgment. But senior justices do not participate in the death penalty cases now, and I think that's a good rule. It ought to be there.
Why is that?
Well, after all, the members of the court are the 7 regular members. And for a case as serious as the death penalty case, unless there's some good reason, I think the regular members should decide the case and write the opinion.
Were the death penalty cases the hardest in your estimation, or were there other?
They were among the hardest, but of course you can get just a good old civil case, and it can be very hard. But I think of a case not long ago that I did write that was of some interest, perhaps, and that had to do with the question whether a person who owns the coal, under the ground, we know that they can own that as opposed to owning all of the fee. But whether the owner of the coal also owns the gas, methane, if I'm pronouncing it right, gas, because it used to be that was the real enemy of miners. Gas was caused explosives in mines, and the big thing was to get rid of it by exhaust fans and so forth. But now they find that they can capture that gas, and it has great value, apparently. Well, the question was, does the owner of the coal also own the gas, or are they separate minerals? And we held that they're separate. Coal is coal, gas is gas. That's about, but I had that little opinion to write. I found that to be a right interesting question.
So who would end up owning the gas?
Well, it wouldn't be the coal owner unless it would be the owner of the party that had reserved the mineral rights other than coal, or that's a big answer.
That's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
When you sat down to write your opinions, did you sit at a computer?
No, I've never sat. had a computer. I'm the only one that doesn't have a computer on Judge, and I don't take any pride in that, but I just never got around to it. And I believe every case that I've ever written an opinion in, I've written the first draft on a yellow pad,
And so who would transfer that to type for you?
my secretary,
And who was your secretary?
Brenda Lemons, very good. She's been with me. She was with me for a while when I was circuit judge, for a little over a year, I think. And so she came to work for me in 78 or 9, 78 maybe. And so she's coming up on 30 years, I guess. She's still fairly young.
She's 29. Old.
So what about the law clerks? How, did you change your law clerks frequently, or did you
No, I didn't.
So tell me a little bit about that. Who's the first law clerk that you had?
A young man named Stein, Ed Stein. My son had known him at law school. They were, I think, just a year apart in law school. And see, when I was appointed, or elected, I guess you should say, by the General Assembly, that was in the winter of 1981. And it was difficult maybe to find a law clerk at that time of the year, because most of them. But he recommended Ed to me, and so I hired him, and he was with me for, I think, a little over 2 years. Some of the justices wanted a new clerk every year. I think one reason is you're training more people, I guess you might say. But I didn't. I found that you didn't have to do it. So if they wanted to stay with me and they were good, I welcomed it. You know. So then the next one, Mary Grace O'Brien, she was. She's now a judge up in Northern Virginia, Prince William County. District judge, I think, but I predict she might be a circuit judge someday. She's a mighty nice woman, young woman. And she stayed on with me 2 years, as I remember. Then the third one was Bob Rice, but he's a wonderful fellow, and I'd love to have had him in more than a year, and he would love to work with me, but he was committed to go with Hunton and Williams. He went with that law firm, big firm here. And then Johnny Spate was the next one. She was a character, but she was real good, smart. And she stayed with me 2 or 3 years. And then I recommended her to a law firm in Roanoke, and they hired her. She's still with the firm. She said she'd like to stay on with me, but she had a baby while she was working for me, and he finished high school last year, or this year, I guess, early.
Wow. Did most of them come from the same law school?
All of those did. They came from Washington Lee. And then my present law clerk also went to Washington Lee, and she married a young man who was from Covington. He practiced law, and they were classmates in law school. He practiced with a firm in Roanoke. But Kathy Leach, she is now. She's been with me ever since. That was, let me see, she came to me, gosh, she's been with me, I think, about She's broken all records, 17 years or something like that.
Wow.
And she was here yesterday. She's still young. I don't work them too hard.
What are some of the characteristics that you look for in a clerk?
Well, they all have plenty of sense. So and probably more than I do. And then I don't know, just people that you get along with. You take Kathy for an example. I write the first draft. Pretty rough, I guess. But when Brenda will type that out, I'll put it on the computer. Then Kathy will take that draft, but she doesn't make substantive changes, but she makes good editorial suggestions. And we discuss things back and forth a little bit. And but we worked together so long like that she kind of knows. I think she knows how I think, or how I don't think, or something. And she's very easy to work with in that regard. And I'm pleased that I have her. She wanted to continue on in that kind of work, and there's no rule that says you have to change. So she, I don't know how long this is going to go on, but I think they're leaning on a weak read when they lean on me. I'm too old.
So now, what made you decide to retire from the court?
Well, I was then 75, and I thought I had a feeling, and some of my friends and people that I admire were of the opinion that 75 maybe ought to be the limit. Although, Lord knows, a lot of people can go after 75, and good of mine. We had our former longtime Chief Justice, Harry Carrico. He was just hitting his prime at 75. But I just thought the time had come to maybe slow down a little bit. And they were willing to have me stay on as a senior justice. So we worked theoretically, I think, about a fourth of the time or something like that. I don't know how we ever determined that exactly. But we still write opinions and sit on panels. This coming session starts a week from Monday. I'm going to be sitting on all the cases that day, and the others will be sitting on other days about all the cases. Because see, we're one justice short now since Justice Lacy retired. She's just right in here with these old retired fellows. and that's junior seat on the court is empty. I don't know when it's going to be filled. Whether it's the governor or the General Assembly, or how it looks like it may go up to the General Assembly, since the governor hadn't appointed anybody yet, to my knowledge. But that's none of my business. I'm sure they'll get a well-qualified person.
So now when you've come to Richmond for the sessions, since your home was in Covington, now it's in Hot Springs,
Yeah.
did you usually rent an apartment, or did you have a small house here?
No, we stayed at hotels. When I first went on the court, there were about 4 or 5 of us, 5 maybe, that commuted and stayed at the John Marshall Hotel. We closed it down. John Marshall closed in 1987, as I remember, and has never reopened. So I guess we were. Then we usually try to get together on another place to stay, and we stayed at several different places. As long as I say several couples. Back then, the spouses always came with the husband to court, and they would have their shopping tours and things, go around during the week, have a good time, and while we were working. And it made it very pleasant. So the days at the John Marshall, we still look at that like that was maybe the best of all worlds.
So staying there gave you an opportunity then to interact a little bit more, you think?
Oh yeah, you got closer to those people that stayed there. We got very close. Like, when I went on the court, the senior member of the court, in the point of view of age but not service, was former Governor Albertus Harrison, and he was a mighty fine gentleman, and I think we all looked up to him. And he and Miss Harrison stayed there at the John Marshall, and then George and Lee Cochran, you've probably met them. They were there, and they were good friends. We all were good friends, are still. And Carrington Thompson, who I mentioned earlier, he stayed there at the hotel. He only stayed on the court 3 years. I don't think he was altogether happy with the appellate work, but I don't know. He was a very nice and very smart man. He and I were good friends, still are. I haven't seen much of him, but his wife did not come as often. But he was there with us. And then Charlie and Callie Russell. Charlie came on the court the year after I did. And they stayed at the John Marshall till they did finally move to Richmond after a number of years.
So why the John Marshall?
Why did it close?
Why that hotel? Why did you all stay there?
Well, that's where they'd been staying for years. A lot of the justices before that I never even knew personally. I think there's just been and for that matter, the federal judges, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeal judges, stayed there. But they left shortly before it closed, I think. We used to see them though, and sometimes we'd get together with them.
So did you all frequently have dinner together during that period?
The people that stayed at John every night. Yeah, we would find something to do every night during the session. But we did, back then we didn't have the Court of Appeals, so the days were long. We would hear arguments on the regular docket in the morning, go to conference on those cases in the early afternoon, and then about mid-afternoon or maybe later start taking up these petitions for appeal that were just submitted without oral argument. We called them no orals. And we'd have to take those up, and it could easily be 6:30 or later when we finished up. But the wives were patiently waiting.
With their tongues hanging out, what to eat.
But we'd go out somewhere to eat.
Now, did you all find yourselves talking shop?
No, didn't talk shop. Talk about everything else.
What were some of the things that you enjoyed?
That I enjoyed?
Talking about.
Oh, I don't know. It depends on what's going on. If it's football or golf or what the women love to talk about, museums or what.
I understand you're a big golfer.
Well, I don't know who told you that, but I'm not a big one, and I'm not much of anything anymore. I may, if I ever had a little talent along that line, it's gone.
So were you able to indulge in golfing while you were on the court? Or was the schedule so hectic that...
I played on mainly weekends.
Did any of the other justices join you?
Oh, yeah. Oh, Justice Cochran and I, we, in the summer, when court wasn't in session, we made some trips to Scotland, and we played some of those great courses over there. But,
Who would usually win? Who usually won?
Between, well, we were about even Steven, I guess. He was a good tennis player, but when he got older, he took up golf again. Very good at it. He made a hole-in-one when I was playing with him over at Hot Springs one time.
That's interesting.
With the ball he'd found on another hole. I think
Well, I have just a couple of last questions, and I was wondering, while you were on the court, and then now that you are one of the senior justices, have you noticed any change in how you all operate on the court at all? I understand that early on, justices didn't ask as many questions of the lawyers, and then they started asking more questions. So I'm thinking of that kind of an operation.
Probably the judges now do ask more questions of the lawyers than the older ones, like those when I first served with. Although they'd ask some questions, but it wasn't. They mainly let the lawyers argue, I think. I don't know which is the best way to do it. I think if a justice has a real serious question that needs to be answered, it's good to ask a question.
What is your particular style, both as a...
I'm all ears. I don't ask too many questions. I figure if I don't do that, if I don't ask, they won't know how stupid I might be.
So you're one of those who really waits for the attorney to make a good argument.
Pretty much so.
My final question is, what kind of people do you think end up being appointed to the court? Do you see a similarity in people's personalities or perspectives?
Well, that's hard for me to answer, really. But I think I see some similarities, of course, because I think that those that have come on recently, all the very scholarly. My predecessor, Cynthia, she's extremely bright, scholarly person. And the same goes for Steve Agee and Don Lemons. They're the three most recent, and they're all, in my judgment, quite brilliant.
Do you have a favorite memory that you would like to conclude this interview with? A favorite memory of your time on the court?
Oh, there's so many memories. I don't know what could be the favorite.
Perhaps something that's humorous or poignant?
We had a justice, Henry Whiting. Have you met him? He's a wonderful, likable fellow and a very smart man. But hate to use this term when you are a professor, but he is more like the old absent-minded professor than anybody I've known, because he is smart, but he has trouble with losing his keys and locking himself out of the house. I mean, and all of his stories he'll tell them on himself. He's so, and it's the most comical thing. I heard he had an appointment to come down here, and he picked the wrong day or something. Well, that's typical of Henry. And listen, I tell him, you know, he knows we think. I'm not talking behind his back to hurt him, because we're all very fond of him. But he tells these things on himself. Some of the stories, if we'd ever written those things up, it'd be a bestseller. But I don't. But it was. But he got a fine intellect, and he was an outstanding lawyer. I don't know. You wonder sometimes with his problem of keeping up with dates and things. He did it, but he did it.
He was reserving that for the more important things.
Yeah, I guess so.
Well, thank you so very much for this interview.
Well, thank you.